All right. That might be close. Cool. G'day all. How we doing? Just going to double check that everything appears to be live. Should be getting joined in just a moment by a fella who described himself as a left-wing, well, at least comes close to describing himself as a left-wing anti-lockdowner. Just waiting for him to pick up the phone. Hopefully he rocks in. I've got two screens now, which is good, so I can see the chat while it's rolling as well, so that should be nice. Won't leave it to like last time when we got bloody 20 questions before I even realised that it was there, and most of it was people telling me that they couldn't see what I was talking about, which was a bit shit too. So hopefully we can avoid all that crap. All right, let's have a look. All right. Yeah, just waiting for him to accept the invite to the stream. See what happens. I haven't really been paying attention to the news much today. I'm not sure if the planned protest went ahead in Melbourne today. Looks like at least this fella wasn't along, which is something at least. Yeah, but I believe the big stuff's planned for Sunday in Sydney, which is going to be. Yeah, look, I'm pretty kind of worried about the whole thing. Obviously, with the ADF being deployed, I do not support that action one iota. Although it's something that kind of confuses me, really, because my understanding is that they're not actually able to even carry their firearms in this situation. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what the ADF presence does, but I think it does it certainly sends the wrong message, I think, in that their whole approach to handling these lockdown protesters is just fear. And I don't think people tend to respond that well to it. Yeah. Let's just see where this guy's at. Hey, g'day, whoever's there, eh? Who's watching? There's 9 bastards. Can't. Surely someone can make me feel like I'm not just talking into the void right now. Oh, and you'll just drop off. Fine. See if I care. All right. I'm not sure what's happening with this guy. I've just asked him if he's gotten the link. Hasn't appeared. Hello, Colbardus. Oh, Max. Great to see you. Soma. Nice. Wonder if the ADF will be deployed in the rich suburbs where the virus originated, he said sarcastically. Indeed, he did say that sarcastically. All right, there's our mate. Looks like he's just appeared. Let me just add him to the stream, make sure he can hear.
G'day.
Hi, Ryan. Can you hear us?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you, Jono?
See him buzzing. No sound. What's that about?
Can you hear me? 1 second.
He's unmuted completely? How very strange. I know what's going on. There we go. Can you hear me now, mate? Oh, device is not connected. He's gone. Bugger. God, this is going so well, isn't it? Yep. Yeah. I know what the problem was there. This is the thing where I'm dealing with soundboards and shit. All right, add to stream. Can you hear me this time, Ryan?
Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry about that, mate. That was my mistake. How are you doing?
Okay. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, doing quite well. Just thanks for dropping in on a Saturday arvo rather, and just to have a bit of a yarn. So I've titled the stream talking with an anti-lockdown lefty. Do you feel like that kind of encapsulates you correctly? Like, is that fair to say?
I wouldn't sort of. I think I hold a lot of values that you would call traditionally left.
Sure.
However, it's made me think as to whether I am still part of the group that occupies the current left in Australia, right?
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, like I guess the tag lefty isn't something that you've got a problem with or anything like that. Like that's cool.
I've never phoned about communists or anything like that. I
cool.
understand their point of view, and I've held many of the points of view myself before. So yeah.
Beautiful. All right. So look, just really quickly. So look, again, thanks to Ryan for joining. Well, we can ask him if he's got anything to plug in a second. Look, I'm really hoping in this conversation we're not going to get terms of service, but we'll see how we go with that. I believe, though, that I'm hoping we won't, because you described yourself as fully vaccinated. So I'm guessing you accept that the virus is real. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fully vaxxed, obviously, which I guess hopefully that will stop the censors coming down on me too hard for this.
I'm pro-vaccine, and I'm also pro-vaccine choice. I should add. But yeah.
Okay, so when you say pro-vaccine choice, what I mean, I think I know what that means, but do you want to?
I think that I'm against coercive measures. But I think there's I can sort of understand why a lot of people are very excited about the idea of mandatory vaccination, and it's certainly not something society hasn't tried in the past.
Sure.
To varying levels. But I guess the way to put it would be, I think if you're excluding people from society, it becomes counterproductive. Number one, I think you risk creating a large underclass of people.
Sure.
10-20% of it, and it might not even be feasible, because they'll find ways to get around it and all sorts of things. There'll be sympathizers like myself who will help them and all sorts of things, right? And so I might not be against the idea of a certain venue or something holding an event for vaxxed people only.
Sure.
Because I understand that there's some people who are very, very scared of the pandemic, and they might even have reason to be, all that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
okay.
but at the same time, if it was to, there would be a balance, right? If it was to extend across every business, and I think you understand what I'm getting at here, right? And,
I think I do. Yeah. Keep going. Sure.
That's all I really want to say on that point.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Look, and something I did mean to say at the start, but I forgot. Look, I'm really not approaching this like a debate. We're not going to declare a winner at the end of this, or anything like that. I just want to make that clear to everyone listening. This is about me being kind of intrigued by your position and me wanting to understand. But and Max is sort of, I think touching on what I guess comes to mind immediately when I hear that, because I do understand what you're saying, of course, if we're excluding from society and that creates an underclass. But what comes to mind immediately for me, like I've got a lot of friends who can't get the vaccine because they're immunocompromised. Now, they then obviously can't share space with people who aren't vaccinated. Does that not then create an underclass of the disabled?
Well, I mean, with immunocompromised people, it goes beyond COVID a lot for them. I think you would understand that.
Sure.
There's all kinds of there's 200 other viruses, floating around that also present risks to them, and in fact, immunocompromised people are a bit more at risk from COVID, but they're also not entirely more at risk, because one of the features of COVID being a novel disease is there's a couple of ways it can kill you. I think you understand this. There's one way is that there's a very out of control immune system reaction. The cytokine storm. You familiar with this idea?
More or less, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but yeah.
I'm not an expert either, but there's basically a couple of ways. The point is that some people who are on, like a immune suppressant medicine, like Humira or something, to push down their arthritis, have actually been told by their doctors that they might actually be a little bit less at risk in some ways to that.
Oh, yeah, all right. So, I mean, I guess that there's probably those people for which, I understand what you're saying. So I'm guessing that there are some cases where that's probably true. But that does sound, I mean, what can I say? I mean, I'm speaking anecdotally here. I'm sure I can pull up something if need be. Like, I have friends that have been advised you cannot leave the house while this pandemic's going on, and they've, I mean, we're struggling with lockdown. It's all very hard for us, but I can name at least 2 people in my life that basically haven't been able to leave their homes and have actually ended up moving interstate simply because the only way they can get some sense of normalcy, because they are so at risk from COVID, and they're not able to get the vaccine. And I guess when we're weighing that up then against, like, people that don't have a choice in this versus the people who just have a fear of the vaccine, and I would warrant, and I think that you agree that that is an unfounded fear. I guess I kind of land on the side of the people that don't have a choice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Although it's more than just that. Like this mandatory vaccination concept stems out of the mandatory lockdowns that started it. And okay, so it then comes back to the idea of was there ever a way to shield these people and make their lives better, right? And then therefore saving the bulk of the population from lockdowns, which have gone on for a very, very long time, and also other keeping kids in school. A lot of things like that, and sorry, I just thought, well, look, because that's kind of, to me, it's kind of 2 separate things, really, isn't it? Like, sort of these people that can't, because again, like, I'm thinking, again, and this is medical advice, which, I don't really feel right to question that, they have been told that this virus is worse for you than your average flu. You need to stay home. And in that case, but the kids at school thing's an interesting point as well, though, because and this is the thing. I mean, I'm not actually in favor necessarily of mandatory vaccinations either. I just know, I guess, which side I feel more inclined to pick on in this situation, for lack of a better term. I understand. I understand what you're getting at, and I think there's many of the vaccine fears are unfounded. Although there are the anti-vax movement doesn't completely exist for no reason. There have been cases where, and again, this is slim odds, perhaps, where horrific things have happened under the guise of vaccination programs. And I think that it would be difficult for such a thing to happen with the COVID vaccine. But let's say it happened at just one clinic, right? And someone
what happened? Sorry.
So let's say how can I put it? So in Melbourne, for example, Melbourne University in the 1930s conducted a number of experiments on orphans, right?
Sure.
And there's tons of examples of this in the Western world. And now imagine you've got them queuing up to see the doctor, and they're all getting their jabs or whatever, and the nuns are standing beside them going, getting line, kids, and they are actually being experimented on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, would you really want to be the person who forced that kid into the line, right? Is the point?
So hang on, let me just. So I think what you're saying. So in this scenario, so it would be, and I'm certainly not downplaying it. But in this scenario, it would be so like we're talking about an experimental vaccine that is a human trial, and it's being put into children. I guess is that.
Oh, look, I don't think that's true of COVID.
COVID, okay.
No, I don't think it's true of the COVID vaccine. But I'm saying this is the argument for freedom of choice with vaccines.
Okay.
And also the side effects of the vaccine, right? So if you forcibly grab someone, stuck a vaccine into them,
right,
and then they died from it, it's a little bit different to if you were just walking around living your life and the virus happened to pass through you to another person. In terms of a
well, let's park that for a moment.
Yep.
So because I guess the thing that comes to mind for me there is like, so what was I going to say? Sorry.
Yep.
So you're saying this is slim odds. You don't think that this is the case. But so you're making the case for sort of like the vaccine freedom movement because they believe that this is an experimental vaccine, but that's not your position. Is that what you're getting at?
I could be wrong. I could be wrong in my assertion that it's right, and the vaccine's okay. And I have to allow for that slim possibility that I'm wrong.
Well, at what point do you, I guess, bet the odds? Because you're saying that it's slim odds there, but I guess in this scenario, like we know what happens when COVID runs rampant through countries.
Okay, so
in that, and I guess,
bring it back to the individual again, right?
Sure.
If you've got COVID, and let's say most people probably do the right thing and quarantine after they get it.
Sure.
And so you've got the odds of a person going outside and deliberately spreading a virus, which I do believe is a criminal action. But kids crying.
That's all right.
Yeah, if you the odds that you've actually killed someone by living your life start to drop down a lot, right? Like from I think you understand what I'm trying to get at. Like how much calculated damage have you done with your action, and that action could be just going to work and trying to feed your family, right? Or something that the government has in some cases put restrictions against, targeted against only certain people in the population who bear the weight disproportionately for the rest, which also can be incredibly harmful to them. And
okay.
I think
I think I understand what you're saying. In this, sort of in this scenario, in I guess the case of Australia, if someone tests positive, they're going to hopefully isolate. The chances of that sort of then spreading is, and them being responsible for somebody's death is quite small.
Mm.
Look, let's just park that just for a second. I just want to acknowledge the chat. One second. Let me just acknowledge the chat. So Max just saying, look, he doesn't like this correlation, and I think that was in regards to the. I think and then I understand, and then Pixie as well. Understand the scientific community has had this happen previously, but are these forced experiments happening for the COVID vaccines? And I think the chat didn't love that, and I think it's worth pointing out that I don't think that's your position. But also acknowledging that, I think it's a long shot. Yeah, it's important. It's important to keep in mind that the ethical developments that have happened in the scientific community over the last few decades are pretty strident, and it certainly fits. I would find it hard to believe that would be something that people would generally get away with these days. So I feel quite confident in saying that that's not what's happening now, and I think you're in the same boat on that one. I guess my concern though with this virus, I hear what you're saying, that if people get it, then they'll isolate and they'll do the right thing. It does appear though that there's a core that won't do that, and I wonder because. Part of the problem why this particular virus is so bad, and I know that that you're aware of this, that it does often present with mild to no symptoms. It's highly contagious. It can live on surfaces for way longer than most viruses. And that was, part of what, I remember it back from sort of first year bio, back when I was in science rather than the social sciences, was, that people were worried about bird flu. And I remember my lecturer then telling me, look, this one's probably not going to be the bad one because it doesn't have this long incubation period before symptoms. It doesn't survive outside of the body that well. Whereas in this case, this is what's happening. So even in somewhere like, the Asian countries where people are, I think, they're quite used to dealing with pandemics. They're quite good at wearing masks and that sort of thing. It's still managed to spread pretty rapidly, even with all of that stuff in place. And I guess, that's the worry here, isn't it? That if people aren't, that those few who won't do the right thing or maybe aren't aware that it is contagious enough to spread rapidly. And I think that's what we've seen around the world.
Yeah, I think that what I think what a lot of people don't understand here is the background of lockdowns and why they actually were not considered for any sort of reasonable influenza pandemic up to and including something of Spanish flu severity, which is to put it bluntly, a fair bit stronger than COVID, and COVID's stronger than the flu. I understand, but COVID, it's if you've got a 1, 2, 3 severity level of flu pandemics, that is a novel flu disease. COVID sits around the middle, and
sure. Do you mean when you say 1, 2, 3 in terms of severity, you're talking about death, or you're talking about contagiousness?
Not contagiousness is a little bit higher, and death it's a little bit lower. And the distribution of death is also a little bit different as well. COVID follows the normal mortality curve, whereas some of these flu pandemics have strange humps in the middle where they like the Spanish flu, which tends to, that knocked off people in their 30s very commonly, causing them to hack up blood and all sorts of things. It's a different disease.
Sure, but so when you're saying flu though, so you're not just obviously you're not referring to your average seasonal flu. You're talking about the variant that comes out that will kill you basically.
Yeah, I'm talking about a novel influenza, so a pandemic flu, right? The first couple of waves of a new flu that will eventually, to be honest, come and join the rest of the seasonal flus, right? Because that's generally how it works.
Sure,
I think you understand this. And in fact, that's true of coronaviruses as well. It's likely that the common cold, the 4 strains of common cold in circulation, they were pandemics at some point, right? But now they're just colds, right? And so for example, the OC43, so the Russian flu, is believed to be a coronavirus of 1887, and that is now just one of is quite harmless. So yeah,
sure. So, but those Russian flus and these other examples, like these were quite devastating to communities, though, and like a lot of people died as a result of these examples.
It's not though. There was usually not much done, and there hasn't been much done about respiratory pandemics ever, really, except for the Spanish flu, which even then they only even in the States only shut schools for about 4 months because it did have a spike in children, and obviously it's more targeted and relevant to close schools there.
Sure.
And in fact, I don't know if you've read it. I mentioned it to you before, but the Australian Pandemic Handbook, and in fact most literature around the world before March 2020 specifically says it specifically says do not do what you're doing now because you'll probably fail, and you're just likely to cause a whole lot more misery while you fail. And Australia and New Zealand, in this case, are outliers in the world.
Right.
He had very good.
So let me just slow you roll there a little bit, mate. Sorry. So I think so one of the important things there, I think, is that okay, so you're saying that during a lot of these other respiratory pandemics, apart from the Spanish flu. Now, again, my understanding was the Spanish flu was far more deadly than these other examples, but I'm not going to pretend to know that off the top of my head. But
minor, mild pandemics.
Sure. Okay, so which to me would necessitate a far stronger response. And I think, but I guess, you're saying that, okay, nothing was done in these other ones. So, I mean, you've got the concept of seriousness of this particular pandemic, which I think necessitates a bigger response. But then also, doesn't that just reflect the fact that we're doing better when it comes to saving lives? Yeah, like this has killed millions of people around the world now. And given that potential, I think that warrants, because I get it. I mean, I live in Melbourne. I loved the lockdown at first. It was great. I didn't have to see people. Now, months, or over like a year and a half later, I'm fucking sick to death of it. I'm depressed all the time. I'm tired. But that's still better to me than seeing vulnerable people die. Okay, well,
that's probably where we start to diverge in the in our values. I think that if you say, first up, let's acknowledge that these lockdowns are going to, and in fact are already starting to cause lives to end early, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, I work in mental health, and the effect that it's had on our clients is absolutely legitimate for sure. But I think what I'm going to say is in the tail of that, it's far less than the potential for COVID in lethality. At least the potential.
Well, no, I think the point is that if you, so COVID in, say, a country like Sweden, where they did a mitigation strategy, right? A mild, it was the old playbook, really. It was the science before China demonstrated to us a new type of science in February 2020. But one thing about Sweden's response is it was established that you kept kids in school. You tried to keep as many jobs as possible alive, because all these things they really matter. And the other thing is, in terms of it depends on how you, and this is the one thing that we've never been shown, is how do you assess the value of the damage that you're causing to, say, 1 or 2 million people who might be seriously harmed in terms of their mental and other health. or in fact dead. Like there's a number of people who are dead from this.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about suicides or anything like some of the wingnuts say that there's masses of people jumping off. I'm talking about like other types of diseases that have been caused by the hospital disruptions, especially in Melbourne.
Sure.
Where
Okay.
especially
Well,
in Melbourne,
let me just jump in for a second there.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking, so I just looked up the stats for Sweden because I honestly didn't know them off the top of my head. So they're looking at the moment. So what is it? Total cases over the pandemic, they've had 1 million, and it looks like their total deaths were 14,000. 14,500, which is quite severe. And I think when you're saying that as well, like, how do we assess these other things? And I agree, these are very important. But at the same time, surely you've got to consider them less severe than fatality.
Okay, so all right. I think that it's over time. It's how one of the ways that they used to do it in government is they talked about life years, and or quality adjusted life years or something like that. So if you've in the case of COVID, the average life years lost is maybe between 5 and 10 years, right? And then if you say there's another disease, like, you probably know about severe schizophrenia or something, might actually take 20 years off someone's life, or a case of homelessness might strip 30 years off someone's life. Or a case of depression might only take 1 year off someone's life.
Sure.
However, if you add all this up, then I think that you come to worse judgment. And I'm not saying life years is the way to do it, right? But I'm saying that what we've never ever been shown through this is any of the scientific rationale for making these decisions, other than a discussion of cases and cases and deaths, and also other illnesses that could be associated with COVID, which I don't deny exist as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, look, I of course I do agree with this, with this idea that, schizophrenia bad, of course, but I mean, you said in there, I'm not sure how relevant this is, but you said in there, the case of schizophrenia could take 20 years off a person's life. Now, that's a complicated thing. And we do have interventions that we know that can improve that drastically. And we can do that. We can do a lot of that sort of thing as well. And I think, it's,
what's the cost of taking kids out of school for up to a year? And especially the most vulnerable children as well, because that's what seems to hit the hardest.
And I agree that there are definitely impacts of doing that, and I guess if there were no impacts of it, then you wouldn't call it a decision. I think that there's a need for. Well, again, I think that the answer to that, to me, comes back to far better management than we've had. I think I do still maintain that I think that the fatalities of vulnerable people need to be considered above that. I do think that that's worse than bad development, even though that is still a problem. You're going to have to make a choice somewhere in there, and you're going to have to decide what's more important. With that, though, I mean, I do agree that, with this, I think the overarching feeling amongst at least some of the people that I was surprised to learn are sort of semi-anti-lockdown, or at least flirting with that idea that it's been managed fucking woefully. And I think that's, and I just kind of really wish that people were leveling their criticisms at the government in the right way as a result of that?
It's not easy, because the problem is that you, and I don't mean to be blunt, but there is no science behind a lot of this. They're figuring it out as they go along.
What do you mean by no science?
So there is there's no firm science behind this, or even really semi-firm.
Behind you mean lockdowns, or I'm not
behind the whole picture, because all right, you would say, okay, you need to have a pandemic plan, right? And I would argue that we had one before. They had sat down, and some of the stuff that you don't like what I'm saying about, what's the cost of someone losing their job, a kid out of school, is that the other, against the number of fatalities, which might be, sort of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3% of people at the final outcome after a normal mitigation process. It doesn't balance out well, and we all wind up, and there's other things like and then there's, on top of that, the likelihood that it was just going to fail anyway, like it did everywhere. So
well, I guess that's an interesting. Well, okay, so a couple of points there then, because I think so. You just said, so the actual fatality rate is 0.3 of people. Was that correct? Did I hear that right?
On the total population, it has rarely gone above that. I'm not saying that is
in which examples, because my understanding is that there's at least a 3% mortality rate from catching COVID.
No.
Okay, let's what can I have your source on that? Is that okay?
Well, look at a country like the UK, and look at the number of COVID deaths.
Sure.
Understand that most people had got it even before the vaccine. Probably close to the 70% of the population. It's been done. There are multiple studies, even by pro-lockdown people, like
sure.
Gideon Meyer Kaswitz. He estimates the infection fatality rate as 0.6%, and he is literally a pro-lockdowner. There are sort of more anti-lockdown scientists who probably had slightly rosier predictions, bringing it more at about 0.3. But the thing to understand is heavily age stratified. Below about the age of 70, it drops down to quite a low figure.
We know that that's going to change. Obviously, I mean, if you're a healthy young person, that's fine. I guess. Yeah, I really, and I try to say this as evenly as I can, but I really do have a problem with the idea that it doesn't matter because people under the age of 70 are going to be okay, because there's a lot of people that are over 70, and I do think that their lives are valid. So yeah, well, look, if you want to, I think you're able to send me a private chat in the thing, and you can send me that source if you like. Looking at mortality, I'd like I say, I'd rather look at your source. But I mean, I can, there's definitely, I was reading the WHO yesterday, and they were quoting 3% as a general one on a global trend.
To understand, no, that's a case fatality rate, and it's only in some countries. So, for example, someone's just put in the chat here, there's 600,000 people have died in the USA. USA is what, 360 million, is it? Or top of my head?
Yeah, but 3% of cases, and if what we're talking about here is it sort of allowing it to go through a population, that would mean 3% of a population, because presumably something is contagious. No. Okay.
Absolutely way off. And this is the problem.
Sure.
Like, this is that I implore people to do more reading on this, just a little bit, and you don't need to, and I'm not talking about going to any sort of wing nuts. I'm talking about going to the actual sources, because this 3% thing is absolutely way out, right? And
so you're saying, hang on, so your problem with what I just said was the fact that it wouldn't go through a whole population, a virus like this?
Oh no, it would go through 80 or 90% of the
Right.
population.
So what's wrong
Oh,
with what I just said? I'm just sorry.
it would not kill 2% of the population. It never has, not even close
Okay.
to that. Even in the worst hit countries, the the actual fatality rate is far lower, far lower.
Okay.
And these are countries who have had it completely, very almost completely run through them, like Sweden, for example, and well, a ton of countries really.
Yeah.
USA had gotten most of the way already before the vaccine came. They were probably they were running seroprevalence studies. There's a lot of people who catch COVID and don't even know it, right? Like you've pointed out, and
Sure.
it's
Sure.
probably about 10 times the number of cases, varying between country and country.
Sure, but I mean, I'm trying to find ways to answer this where I don't sound antagonistic, but do you understand that people will probably go with a worldwide health authority like the WHO over, I want you to do your reading. Do you understand why people would probably trust that more?
The WHO never strictly said for countries to run lockdowns like this.
Oh no, but we're talking about the 3% mortality rate.
That's I can't. It's not. It's just.
Yeah, that's all right.
It's just not that. Like I can't put it any clearer.
That's okay. That's all right, man. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's okay. Well, I think we've kind of covered sort of the the lockdown thing, and I guess sort of how effective lockdowns will be, and I think we've kind of covered that more or less. I think, I think just to return to something that I think we do agree on, that it has been poorly managed. What sorts of things would you want to see done better and differently yourself?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go. Yeah. If we haven't, that's fine. Yeah.
So the USA, I'm just actually reading the chat, and someone said, there were 600k deaths in the USA, right? There's 330 million people in the US. That means 0.2% of the population have died, right? You will be able to go to the CDC website and see the seroprevalence in the population at various points of the pandemic. I was looking at it early in the piece, which is where they check people's blood for antibodies, right? Whether they've been exposed to the disease at some point. Okay.
Yeah. And I think Tusk just said that to you, and I think that's an important point. That 300 million people didn't get COVID in the US because of the lockdown measures. So while that's 0.2% of their population, that's obviously a lot more than 0.2% of people that got COVID.
No, that's not true either. What Tusk is saying is that 300 million people didn't get COVID is absolutely not true. I know at one point in a lot of areas they had 50% seroprevalence before the vaccine. I'm not sure what it was at when the vaccine came. Might have been about 60. I'm really guessing on this one, but I encourage you to understand that it's not as simple as looking at cases versus deaths, dividing one by the other, and saying, this is the death rate, and this is how many people have had it, and this is how many people haven't had it, because the number is way off that. It's completely different, right? Yeah. So he's saying 35 million cases. No, actually, the US has probably had something like 150, 200 million cases, and the deaths from that is how you would work out the infection fatality ratio.
So
not the case fatality ratio.
The question that's coming now is how do you know that it was 200 million cases of COVID in the US?
Because of they can run, and they have run before, seroprevalence studies, right? Which is what you do is if I've say, or you're a young healthy guy, you've been hit by COVID, and you barely felt it, right? Which happens, and your body just whooped it out, right? Destroyed it, and you wouldn't know that you had COVID because you never presented to a doctor, or maybe you just stayed home or whatever, right? You didn't necessarily go for a test, and or the test in fact missed it because it's up the nose. But they can check your blood up to about 6 months after, or possibly even more, and they can see if you've had COVID in the past.
Sure.
And they've been doing that all the way through. And this is how epidemiologists have done infection fatality rate.
Sure. So which health authority is reporting this then? I guess
the WHO,
is the real question.
Example,
has reported 200 million cases in the US.
No, they haven't reported that, but they have.
Right.
The WHO aggregates studies, right? So they've published data from various epidemiologists who have attempted to estimate the infection fatality rate, which varies a bit between population to population. Like you might have a population like Italy, which has a lot of old people and a lot of people who smoke, for example, and the infection fatality rate is higher. You have a country like a low-income country, for example, where the life expectancy is 60 years old, and the average age is like 20 years old, and they have incredibly low fatality rates from COVID.
Right. Okay. So So again, I mean, I'm sorry, I've got to come back to that point again, man. Like, I guess if there was good evidence that there'd been 200 million cases of COVID in the US, why would Johns Hopkins be reporting 35 million?
Because they probably just wrote the word cases next to it. That's how many cases there've been, which has been done.
What's the difference between cases? Because I thought that's all. I just that you're saying that there's been 200 million people that have been infected with COVID. Surely, if they've been infected with COVID, that's a case. Are they not?
No, they're not cases.
Okay.
And they're not counted as cases. There are separate studies. There are many papers on this, and there's various ways that they collect it. They can do. They sometimes hit up blood banks, and they look at who's been donating, and they just sort of infer from the samples there. They've done. There's heaps of ways that they do it, right? And there have been multiple studies.
I confess myself confused. Like, I'm not sure the difference between sort of 200 million people that have gotten COVID versus cases of COVID.
This is one of the problems with COVID as well, and I want to get at is that a lot of people, right from the start of the pandemic, do not understand the actual severity of it, and they have a vastly overinflated view of what it is. And again, I'm not saying it's just the flu. I'm saying it's much more than the flu. But a lot of people think that it's the plague, and that's not true either. It's not. And a 3.5% infection fatality rate is true of a certain segment of the population. Don't get me wrong on that. But absolutely not across the whole population. Nowhere, not in any country at all. It's it's below 1% everywhere. It's probably in the range of about 0.3 to 0.6%, depending on the country and the use of the population, the health of the population, that sort of thing.
Well, again, I'm sorry, man. I don't know. Like, if I'm looking at a source that tells me that there's been 35 million cases in the US, 1.8% of them have died. That sounds to me like it's 1.8% of people that have been infected with COVID are dead. And I'm sorry, but I don't know. Has anyone? I don't know if What am I missing here, man? Help me. What am I missing? Yeah.
What you're missing is that you've never looked at any of this data.
Okay.
I don't mean to be blunt, and
that's fine. You're not going to offend me. It's
take a long time to make my case.
You're not going to offend me with that. That's fine. Say your bit. Go.
I promise you, I don't sit around, watching, Alan Jones or, although to be honest, he's a little bit more accurate than some of the things I hear around the place. There are a lot of people out there who are marketing hysteria, and that includes the government to a degree. It's the way they present the statistics to you, the way everything is shown, and that a lot of people have a view of the risks of COVID that is, maybe at least 10 times more than what it actually is.
Okay.
And there have actually been surveys done on the population, but
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, thanks for that, man. I think, look, let's just park that because it doesn't feel like we're going to get any further on that one. And I guess that's up to people whether or not they think that's convincing or not. Always ready to take on sources and that thing as well. So feel free to send.
I do encourage a lot of people to read a little bit deeper, and I'm not talking about going down a conspiracy theorist rabbit hole or anything. I'm talking about actually looking at some of the data regarding the seroprevalence of COVID, how far it actually spread, and IFR. The word is IFR studies from respected epidemiologists, and most of them actually have a different opinion to the general public on this, even the pro-lockdown ones. So
sure.
Yeah.
So the question in chat is, where would you like people to read? What would you?
Well, they're usually published on the web.
Do you have some examples? Yeah. Do you have some examples of papers or not handy? That's cool.
I was thinking of putting some together before I spoke to you, but
that's all right. No, all good. I didn't prepare either, so that's fine.
Yeah, sorry.
That's cool. No problem. No problem at all. So I think, so look, thanks for that. I think the other thing that we were talking a bit about was, I guess
the movement itself.
Yeah, and I guess my concern that there are and just forgive me a bit. I've got to, I'm not having a go at you or anything, but I do have a little bit to just sort of build on here. That I guess my concern is that there are bona fide fascists involved. I know that you're not that, and that's fine. And I know that you and some others have done some pretty extreme work to expunge them from the movement. But I guess at the same time, like there are those who are still involved, like this Harrison bloke, and I think that was his name, and that sort of thing, that are definitely intending to try to make this the thin end of the wedge when it comes to converting people. And I think you said to me the other day that, correct me if I'm wrong, because there was another guy who was being pretty antagonistic, so I may be confusing you with the other guy, but it was, that the only people you'd seen that was sort of far right at these rallies was a knot of Proud Boys, and you didn't consider them fascist. And I guess that kind of concerned me, because to me that kind of implies that they've at least moved you over a little bit already. Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't think I'm particularly vulnerable to fascism, and I think this is my critique. How can I put this? You have to put yourself in my shoes, right? And I see a massive amount of harm to not just the health of society. I've tried to articulate my points on that.
We'll take that as a given. Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Let's just assume that what I'm saying is true, right? And I sincerely believe that there's a massive amount of harm being done to society, that these measures are incredibly reactionary and not at all in line with current science. And you see an emergency, right? And the same way I think you see these groups of fascists as an emergency. Probably not everyone in the public understands why you think it's an emergency. And I do. I understand why you think that these groups present a threat to people, right? However, I think one thing is that there's not many of them, right? They have no institutional power. Okay. Despite what some people claim, the police do keep tabs on them. And so I could argue to you that some of what you might do is perhaps unnecessary. And I think there's a number of people in the community who think that too.
Yeah. Yep. So so basically, I to summarize this, what I'm hearing is basically that they're quite a small group. They don't
represent the movement. That's number one, right? And and look, if you to understand that the leadership is a diverse group, a sort of a merging of grouplets. It's quite decentralized. It's probably been a bit more centralization in recent times, but not everyone who goes there is. In fact, I don't think anyone. Very few people who go there are going to get like infected with the Proud Boys disease because there's 10 of them there and there's 5,000 just other fucking people of all kinds of walks of life, and nobody's up there on the stand saying fascist rhetoric regarding COVID, like that it was caused by. So yeah, actually, Shremo brings up a good point. The vacuum of leadership. Let's see who gets on top. Right now, probably the other thing that you would argue about is the fact that some people with different medical opinions have risen to the top, and I would argue that's a little bit true of any protest movement, because the people who are going to spend the most time have some sort of slight vested interest in putting in the hours that it takes to organize, right? So, sorry, if you, let's say I have a crystal healing business, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be more motivated to try and build my personal brand off a protest movement. However, that doesn't mean that it is that, right? Just because some people, or even half the people up there speaking, might say something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's all right. That's okay. I think like what's still concerning me, and it's been a tactic that we've seen the far right fascists, whatever we want to call them, employ to a great extent, is this thin veneer of liberty, which often when we step a lot of it back just kind of ends up supporting capitalism to some extent, but then also is basically it's my freedom to be a cunt to certain people. And I think, and this is part of why, like, I think people tended to perceive this as a wholly right-wing movement at the start, because for a more mainstream level, the only people we were talking about it was Sky News in Australia. We've obviously got what we see in the US, where it does seem to be a far more, homogeneously right-wing movement for anti-lockdowns and stuff in the US, which is different to ours. So I think I can understand why people sort of thought that it was right-wing. But I guess, still what worries me, like I understand that you guys, and you and your group and that sort of thing are not fascists. I am still concerned by the oxygen given to the far right. I am still concerned by, and again, like this argument that perhaps fascists aren't that important, just because they're in low numbers. I mean, that's part of why we do what we do. I mean, I've got a lot of time to pay attention to fascists as well as, say, Scott Morrison, who, despite fascist elements, is at the end of the day a neoliberal, not a fascist. So I think it's, I I think, the point of paying attention to the fascists now is to keep them where they are. And I do worry that this kind of presents them a fertile recruitment ground.
Can I ask you the same question about this pandemic itself and the way that it's been, that you've seen, how would you put it, as one epidemiologist who was more anti-lockdown described it as black forces creeping out of the ground with the way politicians are addressing this, right? And ask yourself, looking at the nature of Australia's solution today, which, to be honest, I could see coming to a large degree, with the ugliness of the way it is, and there's a lot of people whose inner fascist can be brought out by a certain amount of fear, right? And I think you're seeing a lot of de facto fascism. You might not call it that, but I do.
Sure.
In the pro-lockdown movement, in the more hysterical ends of the people who are scared and want society shut forever, civil society quashed for a long time, all sorts of and there's elements, there's huge elements of racism in it as well, regarding border closures and variant factories overseas, and a lot of this is not rooted in any sort of fact as well. So some of it is, but it's.
Let's put that aside for a moment. I think I think what you're referring to, and there have been some examples of people's actions that have concerned me. And I think, for example, suddenly there's a lot of lefties that are suddenly very pro-cop. And almost, well, it's lefties, and I think, something like the mad fucking witches thing, encouraging people to dox people that were at the rallies. I question it, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it. I think that they're pretty ass backwards in a lot of what they're doing at the moment, but I let's just say I didn't agree with that for simplicity. But I think that there's definitely room to resist that, and then to also critique the government's handling of it. Like, absolutely, we have 10,000 people stuck overseas in India because we apparently can't fly them back because of the COVID risk, and yet we can find room for example, well, who was that? What's it? Katie Hopkins. Absolutely cannot argue there. But I think, there's room to critique the government on those things without then, acting as though lockdowns aren't an essential part of COVID management. But I mean, obviously you disagree with that. But I don't think, does it make people then fascist to think that, okay, like let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that, okay, most people see that, this is a highly contagious virus. They're of the opinion that a lockdown is something that's needed to manage spread in a community that's not vaccinated. Therefore, they're okay with lockdowns, but then they're also really not okay with, say, the fact that we can't fly these 10,000 Australians home. We're really not okay with the mismanagement of quarantine at our borders. We're really not okay with the fact that there's a lot of people slipping through the cracks on the welfare support that's available. Does that really then make us pseudo-fascist, I guess?
No.
Okay.
I think there's some people who have taken a more nuanced approach, and they understand the opposition. And to be honest, one of the things that happened in the scientific profession is the way the media, I believe that they hyped up the case for these lockdowns, and that actually a lot of government scientists were initially more reluctant to do it, but when they did it, a large segment of the population realized that it didn't hurt them, and it was actually kind of fun, bit of an adventure, and let's keep doing it.
Yeah,
but without any thought of what they were doing to other people, right? And what's more is you have a lot of discussions with these people, and they won't even hear. They won't even hear the criticism. And I think you've probably seen this as well. They won't even hear the criticism from the other side of why this is wrong. They won't make any attempt to understand what exactly is wrong with all this, and why it's not normal, because it's not normal. And why there's also, I should put, a significant class bias towards supporting lockdowns, because if you've got a lot of money and you're facing a virus which is of a certain lethality, right? Then the only thing that really matters to you when you're comfortable is the virus, right? But if you're poorer, then you have to balance that. And
I see what you're saying.
You have a different risk calculus, and a lot of people say, oh, give them welfare, and that's okay, that's fine, but that's not enough. If someone loses their job, which is paying them, 60, 70 grand a year, the average person, they might have been the sole breadwinner from their family, and they're suddenly on 25 grand a year, which was the deluxe rate of welfare that was offered, then no, they're still taking a huge hit. Meanwhile, at the other end of the spectrum, because of the lockdowns, there was a whole new industries created for more educated people at the upper end of the spectrum, who many of them actually got small pay rises. And again, I can show you some of the data for this later.
I can accept that. I mean, I think, at the top of the pile, I mean, we know that Australia's billionaires have increased their wealth by 50%. Yeah. I don't think that there's any question that the way the pandemic has been managed has absolutely benefited them. But I guess, again, like, if we are to accept, and because this is most people's position, and it remains mine, that a lockdown, because they keep fucking up quarantine and they haven't managed to do the vaccine shoot right. If we keep having like COVID in the community, a lockdown becomes then a necessary part of that. If we just accept that, just for the sake of argument, I know you disagree, but that's okay. Is not the energy then better spent putting it towards, right, you guys need to get better when it comes to quarantine. You need to get the vaccine rolled out. You need to do the things that are going to make it so we don't have to keep locking down. Is that not?
Okay. The problem with quarantine, right, and this is why it's actually been written off by so many epidemiologists beforehand, because it's unsustainable. They haven't looked at the figures, but immigration is probably at about 2 or 5% of what it was. It's a fraction, a dribble, and it has been that whole time. And even though we've kind of given it some priority, we haven't been able to let through our full refugee quota. So there's people overseas who are in fact at risk of death anyway, who we couldn't save, right? And the thing is, it's like, oh, okay, why don't we bring in more people from India in that? And it's like, well, we saw that. What happens is that the solution to COVID tends to become all or nothing in terms of whether you accept fairly widespread transmission with a bit of mitigation, or you kind of go for this zero COVID approach like we've had. And it was always going to be that way. So
yeah, it just sounds like we're getting back to what we spoke to again there, because it just sounds like it's going to be very hard to sort of, if you as is your right, of course, you maintain the position that the lockdowns aren't necessary. Well, I misspoke there.
I think that the lockdowns they work. I agree that they work here in Australia and New Zealand. Right, and then there's a whole lot of other countries like the USA or the UK or Peru Peru especially, right? Because they locked down very, very hard, and indeed the police killed people over there.
Yep, correct.
In enforcing the lockdown. Just there's been examples of horrible police brutality all over the world, and in the Philippines with the fucking fascist Duterte, who he did some sort of awful lockdown, gave the police free range to do whatever the fuck they wanted. The virus still spread, right? So everywhere in the world except Australia and New Zealand, I'd say we took a gamble at the start and we came off very lucky. And that is one of the things that I find most obnoxious about this, that it's not rooted in any sort of established science. Lockdowns in the past were never, ever intended to completely eliminate the disease. They were
let me just pick up on something you said there. Sorry, because you said that you find that the lockdowns work in Australia and New Zealand. So because my understanding is that you are anti-lockdown, though. Is that not correct?
Yeah. Okay.
So. Have I got something wrong there?
Yeah,
Sounds like I have.
Yes, correct. You're correct. I live in Melbourne, right? And how many days of lockdown have we had?
I've lost count, mate, and I couldn't even tell you what the current restrictions are. Honestly, it's so confusing. Yep.
In the last year, between the last the number 2 and now it's about 180 out of 360 days. So you get we spent 1 in every 2 days lockdown or something like that. Whatever it is, it's been a shitload, right? We both agree.
Yeah.
And then there was also the one at the start, 12 weeks or whatever. Now, when these lockdowns happen, one of probably the biggest killers of lockdowns is the fact that a lot of hospital procedures get disrupted and shut down, right? And you go, oh, well, that happens with COVID too. Okay. Now, in Sweden, where they took what was called a fatalistic approach, that we're probably not going to be able to stop it, right? Let's try and mitigate it, and let's let everyone have as good a trot of it as possible, right? And they've actually had less hospital shutdowns than we have had, right? And what that's actually resulted in is we're seeing the start of a increase in deaths, right, which will drag on for some time because of these hospital closures, which are actually probably greater than what we would have faced in terms of disruption from the disease. And that's not including all the other negative effects, like on the very fabric of the community and all sorts of things from these lockdowns.
Right. So it's greater. So the shutdown of the hospitals, the death is greater than the impact of COVID as it stands, or greater than the impact that COVID could have had.
It is definitely greater than the impact of COVID that we've had, but we wouldn't measure it against what we've had from COVID. We would measure it against what we potentially would have got in a scenario where we'd followed our standard playbook, which would not have been elimination. Right.
Yeah. All right. And so sorry, I am right with that, aren't I? Sorry, I'm getting a bit hungry and tired. But so the position is that a hospital shutdown has caused more fatality and suffering than COVID potentially would have. Was that right?
No.
Okay.
Not quite. It's much more complicated than that.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay.
It's difficult to go into, right?
Sure. Okay. No problem. All right. Well, look, I've had an interesting chat. I think we did a good job keeping that nice and civil, which is nice.
Yeah.
What have we got? And just see if anything we missed in the chat. Sweden's constitution didn't have a national emergency provision for disease. They were scrambling to find a way to lock down. They weren't fatalistic. Fair enough.
That's not true. In my opinion. I've watched extensive epidemiologist interviews with Johan Gusecki and Anders Tegnell explaining the rationale. And the thing it'd be nice for you to all understand is this was the way that most countries used to manage a respiratory pandemic like this, especially a highly contagious one that is very, very, very difficult to contain, as you're saying, because we're because this is the end game of it, and a lot of people sort of knew that. These constant rolling lockdowns, this just ever increasing insanity in the community, the shaming of people with illness and that sort of stuff, the hounding these removalists and all sorts of things. I think the history of lockdowns, to understand, was largely abandoned after the Spanish flu. They were briefly resurrected. In some African countries during the Ebola crisis. And Ebola is a disease with a very, very, very high infection fatality rate. It is almost 90% likely to kill you. And MSF actually slammed the idea of lockdowns because they believed, as was the conventional science, that it would disengage the community and scare people.
Sure. Would is MSF currently against lockdowns though?
I'm not entirely sure.
So I reckon I'd warrant a guess on that one. Anyway, look, let's look. I think we've been going for over an hour and a quarter here, so I think we'll probably start to lose people's limited attention spans, given the highly technical world that we live in. So, look, I really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we found it interesting. The crew that we're here. Look, as it stands, just so it's very clear, my position, does still remain, you need to, you should listen to your health authorities. I do remain concerned that, that there are far right, of whatever persuasion people involved in this movement. And, I do maintain, that, the lockdowns are very important. That said, though, I do think that there has been a massive tendency just to assume that it's all right wingers, and I do think that just the shaming of people. I get it; it's fun. I engage in it. I'm probably going to continue to engage in it a bit myself. I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, and I think I made the point in the last video that I made that we're seeing an increase in the number of people attending these lockdowns. And I would have to link that directly to the fact that people are now way more scared, way less supported than they used to be. And that's creating a problem. We've gone from a few hundred to a few thousand. And I think we can, at least you and I can agree that the government's handling of this pandemic needs to be drastically altered if we want to see an improvement. So I mean, I think the final thing that I would say it's very difficult to explain is that there has been let's sum it up. Shoot.
Ask yourself why. And this is going to sound a little bit out there, but ask yourself why nearly every single media person has been in favour of these lockdowns, quite vehemently so. So for example, you see Pat Carvelis and all the ABC journalists, just going, "Oh, yeah, army on the street sounds fucking great." Let's get into it, and they're all on 200K plus, working from home, and they have this class interest. And then
Well, I think that's what I'm saying again, that, you know, if you have vulnerable people that are poor, for them a lockdown suddenly becomes a much bigger deal, and it becomes harder to consider the idea that you're going to, you know, not have your job and you're going to, you know, lose your meaning and all that sort of stuff. And that's what's leading to it. I think we're saying the same thing on that front, or at least close to it anyway. So,
actually, the majority of job losses have been sort of at the lower end of the spectrum. So, for example, a guy on 40, 50K, a guy or a girl on 40 or 50K a year, you know, who will have zero savings and, you know, in a very rough spot, then loses their job. And the bulk of job losses have been there, make no mistake.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my role, I work with, you know, people who tend to be, you know, the people that have lost their jobs, and it's most of my mates too. It is my circle, you know. I mean, we don't tend to be, you know, anarcho-communists because we're rolling in cash. So, yeah, probably, yeah. And I know you know that.
I'm a little bit, probably a little bit older than you, but I am on a very slightly above average salary, but not much. And I actually did also lose my job at the start of lockdowns. I have a family on the way, and I'm in fact the sole breadwinner.
That's I guess real bad to hear, mate. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's fucked up.
And I bounced back. That's okay.
Good.
But
cool.
That was never completely my concern. It was largely a more intellectual concern, and actually having read a lot of public health information and following credible scientists. I'm not talking about the whack jobs at all. I'm talking about people who are actually in the main colleges who oppose this.
Sure. What can I say? Whack job is a relative term, but yeah, look, I'm trying to wrap it up there. So look, thanks very much again. We'll finish up now. Look, good luck to you, mate. I hope things go well. And, you know, just as a final thing, I would encourage everyone to just do what they can and just try and listen to each other when, you know, when it's appropriate. I'm not saying give oxygen to fascists, because fuck them, but there are times when it's worth listening, and at least you can understand. So all right,
cheers,
take it easy. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Mate.
See ya. Bye.